Hello everyone, I'm the Storyteller Daily. Tonight I bring you stories meant to ease you into sleep. Before we begin, please tap like and subscribe so you won't miss the next tales. Leave a comment to tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Now sit comfortably, let your shoulders soften and step with me into the story. I came to the station because silence has a sound and I wanted to hear it properly. The old platforms were a shallow bowl for the wind, gathering every sigh and feeding it back in a low, restless hum. Overhead, the lamps wore halos of tired amber, buzzing gently as if drowsy with their own light. Somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon shifted and the dust whispered down like soft rain. I stood near the edge of the track, the metal cold and dull, and listened to the ordinary chorus of an empty place. The hush of air, the faint skitter of grit, the faraway rattle of something loose in the roof. I told myself I was there for research, for a piece I was writing about lost places and the echoes they keep. I told myself all the sensible things. Yet my breath came slower than usual, like I had walked into a church or a late room in a hospital. Then it came, that other sound, subtle at first, a single click, like a switch being tested behind a wall. It seemed to come from the rails themselves. I turned my head and held still. Another click, and another, spaced perfectly, like a train preparing to move that no longer existed. The sound came again, sharper this time, travelling down the length of the rail like a shiver through bone. I crouched slightly, almost embarrassed by how quickly my ears strained for more. The station remained unchanged around me. The weak lamps buzzed, the pigeon gave a sleepy coo, and the wind scraped along the stone. Nothing unusual, except that measured clicking, like heavy metal shifting weight on invisible wheels. I reminded myself of the history. This place had been closed for nearly 20 years. The rails had not carried a train since before I was old enough to buy a ticket. They were rusted, broken in places, cut deliberately to keep vandals from joyriding old carriages. My mind grasped at that fact like a rope. There could be no train. Perhaps it was only the structure settling, or the sound of the wind teasing loose bolts. Still my heart disagreed. It beat faster, a pulse that tapped in time with the phantom clicks. I moved along the platform, my shoes brushing over old chewing gum marks and brittle leaves. The air smelled faintly of oil and iron, as if the place had been scrubbed only yesterday. I paused beside an old timetable board. The glass was cracked, but behind it, the faded paper still showed departures that would never come again. 11:45, 12:10. All destinations lost to time. The clicking softened. It was almost gone when another detail pressed itself upon me. The normal station noises had thinned. The pigeon was silent now. The roof beams no longer rattled. Even the wind held its breath. I stood in a bubble of near silence, and in that stillness the smallest echoes became loud. My footsteps, my breathing, even the faint rustle of my sleeve brushing fabric, all too clear, too present. It felt as if the station were listening. I told myself not to be ridiculous. I was a writer, not a child. Old places did that. They stripped you down, reminded you of your own smallness. Yet I could not help glancing back toward the end of the platform. For an instant I thought I saw a shape between the lamps, stretched and human-like, but thinner, as though it had been flattened by distance. I blinked, and the platform was empty again. I rubbed my eyes and laughed softly, but the sound seemed swallowed too quickly, as though the air was too dense for it to travel. I checked my phone for the time, hoping for distraction. The screen was black, not dead, just frozen. I tapped it again and again, but it refused to wake. That was when the clicking returned, directly beneath me this time, thudding in pairs, like the slow heartbeat of a machine too stubborn to die. I told myself to leave, yet I stayed, because curiosity is a crueler chain than fear. The clicking did not stop this time. It carried forward along the track, steady and deliberate, as though a train was rolling in slow motion through the skeleton of the station. I leaned over the platform edge, peering into the black stretch of rail, but there was only emptiness. The rails glistened faintly in the sickly light, a pair of dull veins running nowhere. Yet the sound persisted, matching the rhythm of wheels on metal, each strike ringing too clean to be explained away as wind or loose bolts. Then the lamps above flickered, one by one, not all together, but in uneven sequence, as if something vast was passing beneath them, stealing their strength in its wake. A cold draught rose from the tunnel mouth, far at the end of the line. It smelled of damp earth and steel, a scent that did not belong to the still air of an abandoned station. I listened harder. The clicks became layered, joined now by a faint, metallic groan, like pressure building in the distance. The ordinary sounds, the buzzing lamps, the occasional scuff of vermin in the shadows, were gone. It was as though the station had given itself wholly to this one phantom performance. I tried again to wake my phone. It remained blank. I held it up, and its screen reflected nothing but my own face, strangely pale, as if I were already underground. A thought curled through my mind, quiet but insistent. If a train that does not exist is arriving, then it must be for someone. For me. A scrape behind me forced me to spin. My heart lunged into my throat. The timetable board I had touched before now swayed slightly, its cracked glass shifting with a sound like grinding teeth. The paper inside trembled, though no wind touched it. Then, one by one, the listed departures began to blur. The ink smeared itself into dark lines, erasing destinations, leaving only empty boxes. My chest tightened. The sound grew louder. The clicking of wheels became a hammering, fast and sharp. I could almost count the carriages in it. 6, 7, 8. I stepped back as the air grew heavy, trembling with the imagined weight of machinery. The pigeons did not return. Even my own breathing seemed muted, drowned beneath the invisible arrival. Then came the whistle. Thin at first, like someone blowing a note through a cracked flute. It rose, piercing, until it filled the entire station with its shriek. My knees buckled. I clutched the edge of a bench for support, my palms slick with sudden sweat. The whistle faded abruptly, leaving silence so total it made my ears ring. I dared to hope it was over. But then the platform beneath me trembled. A vibration ran through the soles of my shoes, up my legs, into my ribs. Something was moving below, not through, but beneath, as if the station had grown hollow and something vast was dragging itself along the earth under my feet. The lamps blinked again. One went out entirely, leaving a pool of shadow that seemed deeper than mere absence of light. I fixed my eyes on that darkness, and for an instant swore I saw the front of a train nose through it, a gleam of metal, a flash of windows reflecting nothing. Then it was gone, leaving only the vibrating rail and that impossible sense of momentum. I pressed a hand against my chest to calm myself. My heartbeat felt wrong, too quick, almost in rhythm with the phantom wheels. The idea chilled me, that whatever moved here was sinking itself with me, drawing me into its motion. I whispered into the emptiness, "Who's there?" The reply came, not in voice but in sound. Another whistle, closer this time, so sharp it seemed to pass through my bones. The second whistle lingered in my skull like a blade pressed to bone. I stumbled back from the edge of the platform, my breath breaking into uneven gulps. The trembling beneath my feet deepened, shaking the dust from the roof beams, rattling the broken timetables. Something was coming. not as a memory or a ghostly echo, but with weight, with presence. I turned to run towards the stairway that led up to the street. My shoes slapped against the tiles in harsh rhythm, the sound swallowed too quickly by the cavernous dark. Behind me, the rail hammered louder, joined now by a deep, grinding roar, the unmistakable growl of an engine clawing its way through rust and stone. I reached the base of the stairs but froze. Standing halfway up was a figure, tall, impossibly thin, its outline flickered as though the light could not decide whether to reveal or conceal it. It was human in shape, but stretched, its arms dangling too low, its legs stiff like bent metal rods. For a moment I thought it was only a shadow cast by the flickering lamps, but then it moved, slowly, purposefully. One long step down the stairs, the sound of its footfall a perfect echo of my own, delayed by a breath. My chest tightened. "Hello?" My voice cracked in the cold air. The figure paused, its head, or what I assumed to be a head, tilted slightly like a predator considering its prey. The roar of the phantom train grew behind me, the whistle returning in short, stabbing bursts. The sound boxed me in, front and back, no escape. I lurched to the side, vaulting over a low barrier to reach the far end of the platform. Pain sparked in my shins as I landed badly, but I forced myself forward. My footsteps raced against the hammering rhythm on the rail. For a moment I believed I was outrunning both. Then came the footsteps, not mine, heavy, deliberate, clanging as though metal feet struck stone. They followed me, unhurried but gaining. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The figure was no longer on the stairs. It was on the platform itself, moving with a mechanical grace, its limbs jerking slightly at each step. Closer now, its features, or lack of them, were clearer. There was no face, only a smear of shadow where eyes and mouth should have been. I stumbled over a loose tile, crashing against a pillar. The vibration from the rail surged upward through the structure, rattling my teeth. The lamps above me went out in sequence, plunging half the platform into near darkness. The roar of the unseen train filled everything. My ears throbbed. My ribs felt ready to crack with the pressure. I could see nothing approaching down the rails, but the noise, the wind, the tremors all screamed of a presence almost upon me. The figure lifted one impossibly long arm and pointed, not at me, at the empty rail, and then I understood. It was signaling. I had no time to wonder for what. The vibration exploded into a violent quake. I screamed, scrambling along the platform until I reached a service door, half rotted and chained. I yanked the chain once, twice, and it broke with a sound too loud, too final. I shoved the door open and hurled myself into the passage beyond. The noise dulled instantly, the roar, the whistle, the footsteps, all muffled, as if I had crossed an invisible barrier. My ears rang with the sudden absence. My chest heaved with ragged breath. For the first time since arriving, I believed I had escaped. The corridor stretched long and narrow, lined with peeling paint and rusting pipes. Water dripped steadily from somewhere above, each drop an anchor pulling me back to reality. I forced myself forward, deeper into the passage, clinging to the idea that the surface and safety lay ahead. But before I disappeared fully into the tunnel, I glanced back through the open door. The platform was empty. The lamps glowed again, steady and ordinary. No figure, no phantom train, no trembling rails. It should have comforted me. It did not. Because just as I turned away, a faint sound reached me. Not the roar this time, not the whistle. A softer sound, the unmistakable echo of footsteps following me. The service corridor seemed endless, a grey throat stretching forward without promise of light. My shoes scuffed against concrete, each step too loud in the silence. Yet with every pace I told myself I was further from the station, further from the impossible noise. My breathing slowed. The tremor in my hands began to soften. Perhaps it had only been my mind, I thought, an overworked imagination primed by too many nights of ghost stories and research into forgotten places. The railway was abandoned, the figure a trick of shadow and stress. If I could just find the stairs up, the world above would remind me that reason still held sway. A light appeared ahead, a faint rectangle, hazy and yellow, spilling down the walls of the passage. Relief rushed through me like warmth after frost. My legs carried me faster, half stumbling in my eagerness. A door waited there, ajar, its hinges crooked but open enough for me to push through. I emerged into another chamber, small, square, lined with rusted lockers and the smell of damp metal. A single bulb swung from the ceiling, buzzing faintly. Its glow was weak but real, tethering me back to the ordinary world. I sank onto a bench and pressed my palms to my face. I had escaped. I told myself that over and over, whispering it aloud until it sounded true. The air was thick, musty, but harmless. The silence was heavy but natural, no whistles, no grinding, no phantom wheels, just the hum of that old bulb and the soft drip of water somewhere beyond. My phone flickered alive at last. The screen glowed, showing the time. 3 minutes had passed since I'd first stepped into the station. Only 3. It felt like hours. I laughed, shaky and thin, but it helped. I had proof now. I was safe. I leaned back, resting against the cool metal of the lockers. My pulse slowed, settling into something like calm. For a while, I let the quiet cradle me, eyes half closed, body limp with exhaustion. Then I heard it. Not the whistle, not the roar. Something subtler, sliding into the edges of my hearing like a needle into skin. A faint click. 2 beats. Then silence. Then again, a little closer. I sat up sharply, heart knocking against my ribs. The bulb above me swayed, though no air stirred. Its hum wavered, stretched, and dropped an octave as if smothered by an unseen hand. The lockers behind me shuddered. Their doors rattled one after another, a ripple of metallic chatter, like knuckles dragged down a long row of teeth. I leapt away, pressing myself to the center of the room, my breath quick and shallow. The dripping water grew louder, impossibly so, until each drop struck like a drum. Between the beats, the clicking returned, echoing now through the very floor, as if the rails had reached under the room, tunneling through the earth to find me. "No," I whispered. "I left you behind." The bulb snapped out. Darkness fell, thick and absolute. In that blackness the sound swelled. Not one train, but many, layers upon layers of wheels clattering, whistles shrieking, engines grinding. They filled the chamber, though no space could have held them. My body trembled with their weight. My teeth clacked with the vibration. And beneath it all, a new sound joined. Footsteps, measured, deliberate. They came from the door I had entered, each step accompanied by the groan of the hinges, the drag of something long across the ground. I fumbled for my phone, desperate for light. Its screen glowed dim, showing only static, white snow that hissed in time with the phantom engines. My reflection wavered there, distorted, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw another face behind mine, stretched, eyeless, leaning close. The footsteps stopped just inside the room. Silence fell again, so heavy it pressed on my lungs. I dared not move, my ears strained into the dark. And then softly, impossibly, the sound I had first heard on the platform returned. Click, click, click. As though the train had never left, only followed me here. The clicking became relentless, hammering into the floor beneath me like nails driven into a coffin lid. My breath fractured into shallow gasps and I clutched my phone tighter, the static screen casting a faint glow that barely pushed back the dark. I turned slowly, afraid of what the light might catch, afraid also of what it might miss. The lockers rattled harder, banging open one by one. Doors slammed shut and sprang again, a chaotic percussion that matched the rhythm of the phantom train. From inside them came not the expected clatter of forgotten tools, but the unmistakable rush of air, as though each locker door opened onto a tunnel, and within those tunnels, something immense was hurtling forward. I staggered backwards until my shoulders met the damp wall. My phone flickered. For an instant, the static broke into a distorted image, rails stretching ahead, vanishing into a tunnel of endless black. Then it blinked out, leaving me blind again. The whistle returned. This time, it was no thin wail, but a full scream, ear-splitting, vibrating through my skull. I dropped the phone and clapped my hands to my ears, but it made no difference. The sound was inside me, as if my very bones had become tuning forks for its cry. The footsteps resumed, deliberate and closer. I dared to glance toward the doorway, my eyes straining against the dark. A figure loomed there, tall and wrong, its arms swaying like pendulums. It stepped into the room, and with each stride, the air bent, warping the space as though reality itself struggled to contain it. I lunged for the opposite wall, hands scrambling across its surface until my fingers found another door, rusted, locked. My heart thundered. The footsteps drew nearer, slow but unstoppable, like the inevitable approach of an executioner. I yanked at the handle. It groaned, immovable. Behind me, the figure exhaled, a sound like steam hissing from a broken pipe. My skin prickled. The whistle screamed again, shaking flakes of plaster from the ceiling. Desperate, I kicked the door, once, twice. The lock held. On the third kick, the wood splintered around the rusted metal. I shoved with all my weight, and it burst open into another passage, black as a grave. I stumbled inside, slamming it behind me. The sounds muffled, but did not vanish. The clicking followed, running beneath my feet, racing ahead as if guiding me deeper. The whistle chased me through the dark, distant yet never fading. I ran. My breaths tore from my chest in ragged bursts. My footsteps echoed wildly, sometimes answered by others that did not belong to me. The corridor narrowed, forcing me sideways, then widened again into an open space. I found myself on another platform, smaller, forgotten, buried deep. No lamps burned here, only the pale green glow of fungi clinging to the walls. The rails stretched into black tunnels on either side, silent and waiting. For a fleeting moment, there was calm. My lungs heaved, but the air here felt lighter, less oppressive. I thought, foolishly, that I had found the station's true heart, a place too forsaken even for ghosts. Then the ground trembled. From the left-hand tunnel, a roar erupted, deeper and louder than anything before. Air blasted outward, foul and damp, as though the earth itself had exhaled. The glow of the fungi shuddered in the gale, casting wild, quivering shadows across the walls. And then it came. A train. Not of steel and glass, but of shadow, a mass of shifting black with windows like hollow eyes. It surged from the tunnel without slowing, its wheels screaming sparks, though no light touched them. The sound was unbearable, 1,000 shrieks layered into one. I froze, trapped between terror and disbelief, as the thing thundered past me. Its carriages stretched on and on, far too many for the small space, each one filled with silhouettes pressed against the glass. Faces, if they were faces, blank, eyeless, yet turned toward me in unison. My body reacted before my mind did. I threw myself flat against the platform, pressing my cheek to the cold stone as the monstrous train tore past. The wind of it dragged at my clothes, threatening to pull me under its wheels. I dug my nails into the cracks of the platform, clinging like a drowning man to driftwood. The endless line of carriages began to slow. My heart lurched. The shadow train screeched, as though grinding against reality itself. One carriage stopped directly before me. Its door slid open, soundless against the shriek of wheels. Inside was darkness, and within that darkness a hand, long, pale, too many joints. It beckoned. I scrambled back, shaking my head. "No! No, I'm not coming!" The whistles screamed again, deafening, furious. The entire platform shook. Stone cracked. Dust rained down. The hand reached further, stretching impossibly long, its fingers brushing the air, inches from my chest. In blind panic, I hurled myself to the far end of the platform. A maintenance ladder clung to the wall, leading upward into shadow. I seized it, climbing without thought, my legs and arms pumping with animal desperation. Below, the roar of the train grew savage, a predator cheated of prey. I climbed until my arms burned, until the metal rungs trembled beneath me. Then suddenly there was air, cool night air. I hauled myself through a broken grate, collapsing onto the cracked pavement of an alley. The silence hit me like a slap. No whistle, no footsteps, no phantom rails, only the faint city wind and the distant bark of a dog. I lay there, chest heaving, sweat cooling on my skin. Against all odds, I had escaped, or so I thought. I lay on the broken pavement, the night air cooling the sweat on my forehead. For a long moment I did nothing but breathe. My hands trembled, my lungs burned, but the world was ordinary again, real, solid, blessedly quiet. I told myself I had survived, that whatever lived down there belonged only to the dark. I sat up slowly, gazing back at the grate I had climbed through. Nothing stirred beyond it. No vibration of phantom wheels, no shriek of impossible whistles, just the shadows of a forgotten alley and the faint rustle of rubbish in the breeze. Relief bled through me, fragile but intoxicating. I reached for my phone, hoping at last for comfort in the glow of its screen. This time it lit properly, bright and normal. My reflection stared back at me, pale but human. The time blinked on the display, 3:17 in the morning. I allowed myself a tired laugh. It was over. Then I heard it. Faint at first, barely more than a breath. A click. I froze, the sound trickling into my ears like water through cracks. Another click followed, sharper, closer, echoing down the alley. I turned slowly, dread rising in waves. The alley stretched into darkness, empty at a glance. Yet the sound grew steadier, a rhythm I knew too well. Rails carrying wheels that should not exist. Click, click, click. I backed away, heart thudding, eyes fixed on the void at the alley's end. For a moment I swore I saw the faint gleam of windows sliding past, black silhouettes pressed against them, watching. The whistle whispered next, thin as a blade, drifting just above hearing. My breath caught. The grate behind me rattled once, as though something below had stirred, and I understood. The train had never left. It had only chosen another route. I entered the forest because silence is never truly silent, and I wanted to hear what lived between the trees. The night was damp, the air thick with a silver mist that clung to every branch and root. The moon hung low but dim, its light smothered by fog, so that each tree appeared as a shadow, tall and waiting. My boots pressed into the soil with a soft squelch, and somewhere above, an owl gave a single, mournful cry before falling still. At first, the soundscape was what I expected, the faint hiss of leaves rubbing together, the distant creak of bark adjusting in the cold, the occasional snap of something small moving through the undergrowth. I told myself I was here to document the woods at night, to capture its natural rhythm. But then, beneath it all, I heard something else. At first it seemed like wind threading through the branches, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Not wind, voices, countless voices, soft and broken, overlapping like fragments of dreams. They whispered without pause, a hushed chorus weaving through the mist. I stopped walking, every muscle tightening. The forest was speaking. The whispers slid over one another, tangled threads of sound that had no clear beginning or end. I stood perfectly still, my breath fogging in the damp air. Perhaps it was only the mist, I told myself, the way moisture distorted sound and carried echoes further than they belonged. Yes, that must have been it. Just echoes of the village far away, distorted by the trees. But the longer I listened, the less that explanation fit. These voices were not far. They were here, all around me, circling between the trunks. None were loud, none distinct, but together they formed a constant murmur that set the hairs on my arms upright. I tried to pick out a word, a phrase, anything recognizable. The tones wavered, rising and falling, but the language, if it was language, remained elusive, like water slipping through my grasp. I shifted my pack on my shoulders and forced myself forward along the narrow path. The ground was soft with fallen leaves, their dampness swallowing most of my footsteps. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the forest floor wished to claim me. The mist grew thicker, blurring the distance until I could see no more than a few meters ahead. My rational mind clung to explanations. Perhaps some trick of the wind, perhaps the rustling of countless branches overlapping into something that only resembled speech. I had read about such things, illusions of sound that fooled the ear. But the whispers shifted when I moved, always keeping their distance, always trailing me. A branch cracked to my left. I swung my head, heart jolting, but saw only fog and a vague outline of trees. Still the whispers leaned closer from that side, hissing just beneath comprehension. I tightened my grip on the torch in my pocket, but did not yet switch it on. Light, I thought, would only make me a target. I walked faster. My boots squelched in the soil, and for a moment I was grateful for the sound of my own movement, something steady and familiar to drown the chorus. Yet when I paused again, the whispers swelled to fill the silence, like water rushing into an emptied glass. Another sound broke through, a soft laugh, high and thin, unlike the others. It came from directly behind me. I spun, heart hammering. No one stood there, only fog, endless and pale. But I could swear the mist itself shifted as though parting around an unseen shape. I whispered aloud, my voice small in the dense air. "Is someone there?" The forest answered only with its endless chorus. And for the first time, I thought I heard my own name among the murmurs, faint and fading. The moment I thought I heard my own name, the air seemed to thicken. My pulse quickened, and I forced myself to keep walking, though every instinct urged me to turn and run. The forest was no longer passive scenery. It pressed against me, heavy and listening. The whispers grew clearer, no longer a muddled chorus, but strands separating into individual tones. Some high, some low, some rasping like old men, others lilting like children. They overlapped in a tangle that made my head ache. Yet I could tell one thing with certainty. They were not random. They were repeating. The same broken cadences circled me, words, if they were words, falling in patterns. I stopped and closed my eyes, straining to catch them. A faint hiss curled around my ear, close as breath. I snapped my head to the side, torch clutched tight in my fist, but nothing stood there, only mist, rolling and alive. The forest itself had gone silent. No owl, no rustle of leaves, no crunch of unseen animals. Even my footsteps seemed muted, absorbed by the soil. Only the whispers remained, louder than before, swelling until they felt pressed against my skin. I raised my phone, thinking to record the sound, to prove it later. But when I hit the record button, the microphone registered nothing. Only silence. My stomach twisted. The sound was for me alone. As I walked, The trees leaned closer, or so it seemed. Their trunks were dark, slick with damp, and the mist coiled between them like slow smoke. My path narrowed until branches brushed my shoulders, snagging my sleeves. I pulled free, but each time I did, the whispers surged, as if mocking my struggle. Then I noticed something more disturbing. Some of the voices were not overlapping anymore. They were synchronizing. All around me, dozens of whispers fell into rhythm, aligning into the same syllables spoken again and again. Not quite words, but near enough that my mind tried to form them. It sounded like counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sound came from every direction, a hushed litany of numbers that accelerated with each breath. I stumbled forward, heart hammering. My boots struck roots hidden under the mist, nearly sending me sprawling. Behind me, a laugh pealed again, louder this time, closer. I broke into a run. The counting followed, racing me, growing louder, sharper, until it felt as though unseen mouths were pressed against my ears. My breath came ragged, each inhale burning in the cold air. The forest blurred around me, shapes warping in the mist. I thought I saw figures moving between the trees, slender, human-like, yet strangely jerky, their heads tilted at impossible angles. Each time I blinked, they vanished, but the whispers confirmed what my eyes doubted. I was not alone. The counting ended abruptly. Silence fell so sudden it crushed my chest. I slowed, listening, terrified of what would come next. The quiet stretched long and unbearable, then a single whisper broke it. A voice unlike the others, clearer, sharper, directed. It said my name. I froze, my throat tightened, as though invisible fingers had wrapped around it. The mist thickened, curling close, and I saw, just for a heartbeat, my own face staring back at me from between the trees, lips moving with the sound. I stumbled backwards, torch trembling in my hand. The face melted into fog, gone as quickly as it appeared. But the voice remained, repeating my name again and again, until it drowned out all other sound. The forest closed in around me, the fog now so dense I could see no more than an arm's length ahead. My name whispered from every direction, overlapping in a dozen tones, male, female, childlike, ancient, until I could no longer tell which voice was real, or if any of them were. I turned in a slow circle, clutching the torch though it remained unlit, afraid of what its beam might reveal. My throat was dry, words sticking, but I forced them out all the same. "Who's there?" The answer came instantly. A laugh, high and jagged like glass being dragged across stone. It came from a head no more than a few paces in the mist. My heart hammered as I flicked on the torch, its beam cutting through the grey. At first, I saw only trees, pale trunks lined like pillars, but between them something shifted, a figure. It stood still, half formed by the fog, as though the mist itself was trying to remember what shape it should take. Tall, human-shaped, yet wrong. Its arms hung too long, nearly touching the ground, its head tilted sideways, twitching with sharp, insect-like movements. The whispers swelled as my light touched it, hundreds of voices overlapping in frenzy. The figure leaned forward, and with that gesture the forest itself seemed to lean too, branches bowing inward, shadows stretching toward me. Panic seized me. I backed away, nearly tripping over a root. The figure moved then, not walking but gliding, each motion broken into jerks like a puppet pulled by unseen strings. I turned and ran. The whispers followed, louder than the rush of blood in my ears. They hissed and called, speaking fragments of my own thoughts back to me. "Don't look back. Faster. It's close." Their chorus grew so sharp it was almost physical, a pressure against my skull. Branches whipped at my face, roots clawed at my boots. I stumbled but forced myself onward, lungs burning. Every few steps I glanced sideways and caught glimpses of movement, pale limbs flickering between trees, keeping pace without effort. I broke into a small clearing. The mist hung lower here, forming a swirling pool that reflected the weak moonlight. I paused only a second, trying to decide which way to flee. That was enough. The figure emerged from the fog opposite me. Closer now, its face, or where a face should be, was a blank expanse, smooth as porcelain, featureless but for a dark slit where a mouth might belong. From that slit spilled a stream of whispers, dozens at once, overlapping in a language I could almost understand. My legs nearly gave out. I staggered back, torchlight shaking wildly. "Stay away!" I shouted, though my voice broke with fear. The figure tilted its head again, then it began to mimic me. "Stay away!" it hissed in my own voice, warped and echoing. The sound rattled through me, wrong in a way words cannot describe. My body reacted before thought, pure terror, pushing me to move. I bolted toward the nearest path, crashing through undergrowth, torch beam bouncing. Behind me, the whispers crescendoed into a shriek. The trees seemed endless, yet I ran, scraping my arms, tearing my clothes. The sound pursued, footsteps or not I could not tell, only the constant hiss of words, repeating, bending, forming my name until it was no longer a word, but a wound carved into the night. I burst through another cluster of trees, gasping, convinced I had gained distance. I slowed, bent double, chest on fire. For one blessed second there was silence. Then, directly at my ear, the voice returned, soft, intimate, undeniable. It whispered, "You cannot leave." I spun wildly, torch flashing across nothing. Only mist, only trees. Yet my skin crawled as though something stood close enough to touch. I ran again with no thought of direction, driven only by the certainty that if I stopped, the forest would claim me. The forest seemed endless, but finally the trees began to thin. My chest heaved, each breath a ragged scrape, but hope trickled back when I saw the faint outline of a path wider than the others. The mist was lighter here, stirred by a breeze that brushed my sweat-soaked hair. I slowed, listening. The whispers had faded. For the first time since stepping beneath the canopy, there was only my own breathing and the rustle of branches in the wind. The ordinary sounds of a forest at night, normal, safe. I stopped, bent double, and pressed a hand to my ribs. "It's over," I muttered aloud, though my voice shook. The words steadied me, anchored me to something real. I straightened slowly, scanning the path ahead. It seemed to slope upward, perhaps leading out of the hollow where the mist gathered. If I could reach the ridge, I might see the lights of the village. I walked on. Each step felt lighter, more purposeful. The air tasted fresher here, the damp heaviness lifting. I could almost believe I had dreamed the whispers, conjured the faceless figure from exhaustion and fear. Perhaps it had all been an illusion, born of nerves in the darkness. The path widened into another clearing. Moonlight broke through the thinning fog, spilling silver across the ground. The grass here was short, soft beneath my boots, and the trees stood further apart. I exhaled a long breath. Relief washed through me, fragile but intoxicating. I switched off my torch, pocketing it. The light of the moon was enough. Standing there, I felt foolish for running, for panicking like a frightened child. Tomorrow I would laugh about it, write it into notes for my project. Forest acoustics, tricks of perception. That was all. I sank onto a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. My pulse slowed. The night air was cool against my skin, carrying the faint scent of moss and damp leaves. For a while, I allowed myself to rest, head tilted back to catch glimpses of stars through the branches. Then I noticed something odd. The breeze had stopped. The branches no longer moved. The forest was still. Too still. I strained my ears. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, so faintly I thought it was memory, a whisper. My stomach clenched. I sat forward, every nerve raw. The sound grew clearer, threads weaving through the clearing from every side. Not loud, not overwhelming, but present. Familiar, the forest had never let me go. I rose to my feet, heart hammering once more. The whispers circled, building with dreadful patience. Then they aligned again, falling into rhythm. Not numbers this time, words. "You cannot leave," the phrase repeated, layered by countless voices, male, female, young, old. They spoke as one, surrounding me. I stumbled backward, scanning the tree line. Shapes stirred in the mist, figures pale and thin, their outlines blurring into the fog. Dozens of them, each standing still, heads tilted, faces obscured, watching, waiting. The log I had rested on creaked beneath me. I spun and found another figure seated there, so close I could have touched it. My breath caught in my throat. It looked like me, same jacket, same hair, same slumped posture, hands resting on knees. But its head turned slowly, and where its face should have been was only blankness, smooth as fog. I stumbled away, nearly tripping over roots. The whispers surged louder, triumphant, as if my fear had given them strength. I ran again, crashing into the trees, the clearing vanishing behind me. But the voices followed, closer now, each whisper laced with my own tone, repeating my name until I no longer knew whether I was running from them or toward them. I tore through the trees, lungs on fire, the forest shifting like a maze that rebuilt itself with every stride. Branches lashed at my face, tore at my sleeves, but I barely felt the sting. The whispers pressed close on every side, louder now, their words overlapping until they became a deafening chorus. "You cannot leave! You cannot leave! You cannot leave!" They repeated the phrase in perfect rhythm, 1,000 hushed voices beating in my skull like war drums. I stumbled over a root and fell hard, the air rushing from my chest. For a moment I lay there, paralyzed, listening. The ground itself seemed to tremble with the voices, the soil quivering as if riddled with veins that carried whispers instead of water. Then came the laughter, high, sharp, echoing from the mist. It came from ahead, behind, everywhere. I forced myself up, wiping dirt from my palms, and swung my torch beam wildly. The light caught a figure standing between the trees. It was me, or something wearing me. Same face, same eyes, but its expression was hollow, lifeless, lips moving with the voices. It stepped forward in perfect silence, the beam cutting through its body as though it were more fog than flesh. I staggered back, only to collide with another. My torch snapped to the side, revealing yet another version of myself. This one gaunt, skin stretched tight, eyes dark pits. Its lips parted, and the whisper spilled directly from its throat. Dozens more emerged from the mist, circling, each one a distorted reflection of me. Some tall and skeletal, others hunched and broken, each moving with twitching, puppet-like jerks. Their mouths opened and closed in unison, the chorus rising to a scream. Panic overruled reason. I bolted toward the faint slope I had seen earlier, convinced it must lead upward to escape. The figures glided after me, their movements unnatural yet swift, always a step behind. The whispers shifted, turning into something worse. Not words, but sounds of breath, of teeth grinding, of my own heartbeat amplified and repeated till I felt sick. Every noise my body made, the forest copied, throwing it back at me like mockery. I crested the ridge and saw, through thinning fog, a strip of lighter sky. My chest surged with hope, freedom, the edge of the forest. I ran harder, ignoring the stitch in my side, ignoring the ache in my legs. The ground beneath me shook, trees groaned as though wrenched by unseen hands. And then, from the depths of the forest behind, a roar erupted, a sound too immense to belong to any human throat. The figures shrieked in answer, their voices converging into one blast of sound that nearly knocked me to my knees. I staggered forward, my torch falling from my hand. It rolled, its beam catching glimpses of faces, my faces, lunging through the mist. The roar came again, closer. The ground split, roots tearing upward, as though the earth itself rejected me. I hurled myself across the ridge, sliding down the other side, dirt caking my palms. At the bottom, I saw a break in the trees. Beyond it, open fields, silver with moonlight. The outside world. I sprinted, every ounce of strength funneled into those final strides. The whispers rose to a climax, shrill and furious, as though the forest itself screamed in rage at my escape. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, but I did not stop. I burst from the tree line, collapsing into the damp grass of the open field. The sudden silence was crushing. No whispers, no laughter, only the faint chirp of a cricket, fragile and real. I rolled onto my back, chest heaving, staring at the sky. Stars glittered above, clear and sharp. I had escaped, against everything I had escaped. But when I lifted my head to look back, the forest stood silent and dark, mist curling lazily between the trunks. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, faintly, from deep within the trees, I heard my own voice, screaming. I lay in the wet grass, chest burning, eyes fixed on the tree line. My own screams still echoed in my skull, though my mouth had made no sound. It was as though the forest itself had stolen my voice and sent it back to me, distorted and pained. The mist coiled between the trees, drifting lazily, almost innocent now. The whispers were gone, replaced by the natural stillness of night. Yet I could not shake the sense that dozens of eyes watched me from behind the veil of fog. I pushed myself upright, legs trembling, and staggered further into the field. Each step away from the forest should have brought relief. Instead, unease thickened. The silence was wrong, absolute, heavy, as if waiting. I pulled my phone from my pocket, desperate for the familiar glow. The screen flickered on, normal this time, battery intact. But as it lit, I froze. The background image had changed, no longer the plain photograph I had chosen. Instead, the screen displayed the forest, mist, trees, and in the center, a figure. Me. I stared at it, throat tightening. The image moved. My reflection lifted its head, lips parting. A faint hiss escaped the speaker. A whisper. "You cannot leave." I dropped the phone into the grass and staggered back, heart hammering. The device buzzed, screen glowing brighter, the whispering louder, multiplying into a chorus that spilled into the open field. I turned, ready to run, but the sound came again, this time not from the phone, not from the forest, from directly behind me. I came to the house because silence gathers differently in old walls, and I wanted to know what it sounded like. The road up the hill had long since cracked and split, weeds pushing through the stone like veins. By the time I reached the gate, the night had settled thick, the sky heavy with low clouds that hid the moon. The house loomed above, windows like empty sockets, its frame hunched as though leaning against the years. The wind sighed across the hillside, pulling at the broken shutters and rattling the loose iron of the fence. I pushed the gate open. Its rusted hinges cried out in a long, aching groan. Inside, the air felt immediately different, still close, as though the house itself was holding its breath. I stepped into the main hall. My boots tapped against the warped wood, the sound hollow, resonant. Dust hung in the air, catching what little light bled from the broken windows. At first, I heard nothing more than the creak of my own weight shifting on the floorboards. Then it came. A single note from a piano, faint and trembling, rising from somewhere deeper in the house. The note hung in the air, faint yet clear, a sound that did not belong to dust and ruin. I froze where I stood, breath shallow, ears straining. It was only a piano, I told myself. A relic left behind by the family who once lived here, wood swollen with damp, strings loosened by time. Old houses groaned and muttered in their own ways. Perhaps the wind had brushed some mechanism, or the shifting of the floorboards had jarred it into life. But then a second note followed, lower, slower, as if chosen. My throat tightened. This was no accident of timber and wire. This was deliberate. I forced my feet to move. Each step across the warped boards gave a protesting squeal, masking the faint trail of sound that beckoned me deeper. The hall opened into a wide drawing room, once proud, now stripped bare, save for peeling wallpaper and a carpet of plaster fallen from the ceiling. Moonlight seeped in through cracked windows, painting long, crooked shadows across the floor. The piano stood in the corner, upright, tall, its varnish dulled to a weary brown. A shawl of dust draped its surface, disturbed only by thin trails where fingers had passed. The keys, yellowed and uneven, waited in silence. I approached cautiously, my heart thudding, my ears tuned for another note. The silence stretched. Only the wind rattled the broken panes above, and somewhere a drip of water fell with steady patience. My courage stirred. Perhaps I had imagined it after all. Fear breeds sound where none exists. I reached out, fingertips brushing the piano's surface. Cold. The dust clung to my skin. I lifted the floorboard, exposing the keys. They stared back, silent, unplayed. Then one sank, not beneath my touch, but of its own accord. A dull, hollow tone spilled into the room, deeper than before, resonant as though the house itself had answered me. I jerked my hand back, stumbling a step. The key rose again, slowly, as though no hand had ever pressed it. I whispered aloud, more to steady myself than to question. "Is someone here?" No reply came, only another note, higher this time, a fragile chime that shivered through the dusty air. The silence that followed was heavier than before, thick enough that even the drip of water seemed to have ceased. My heartbeat filled the room, too loud, too fast. The piano keys glimmered faintly in the moonlight, pale teeth in a shadowed mouth. And then the first few notes of a melody began, slow, careful, played one at a time, each separated by long pauses, as though someone, or something, was learning to remember the tune. The melody faltered like the memory of an old song, notes reaching for one another but failing to connect. Still each key struck with deliberate weight, echoing in the hollow room. I backed away until my shoulders brushed the peeling wallpaper. The air was thick, almost damp, as though the sound itself carried moisture. I forced myself to breathe, to reason. A trick of old machinery, perhaps. Some remnant of tension in the strings. But as the pauses grew shorter, as the notes began to fall in a steadier rhythm, denial curdled in my stomach. This was no accident. Something was playing. The keys moved visibly now. My torchlight caught them dipping and rising with methodical care, like pale bones flexing in the dark. A chill slid through me, sharp as ice water down my spine. I wanted to flee, to bolt for the door and never look back. But the sound held me. Each note rang like a nail, fixing me in place. Then came the silence, sudden, total, the kind that smothered everything else, the creak of floorboards, the restless breath of wind through broken glass. Even my heartbeat seemed subdued, caged inside my ribs. I dared to hope it was over. The piano answered with a crash. Every key struck at once, a violent discord that rattled the window panes and made the floor vibrate. Dust burst upward from the carpet of plaster, filling the air with choking grit. I covered my mouth and staggered back, coughing, eyes watering. Through the haze, the piano loomed, no longer passive, but alive with fury. Then the melody returned, faster now, confident, a rolling surge that filled the house from roof to foundation. The sound seeped into the walls, into the floor, into me. My bones ached with each chord. My teeth buzzed against one another. I stumbled toward the doorway, but the house resisted. The boards beneath my boots groaned, softening like wax, trying to hold me. I tore free with a desperate wrench, splinters biting into my soles. The hallway stretched before me, longer than I remembered, shadows deeper, the air thick with invisible weight. Behind me, the music grew sharper, more intricate. No longer hesitant notes, but a full piece, rising and falling with a terrible elegance. And beneath it, yes, beneath it, I heard something else. A sound woven into the chords, breathing, slow, deliberate, steady as the tempo itself. I spun, torch beam cutting across the room. For the briefest second I thought I saw her. A woman seated at the piano, hair long and black, spilling across her shoulders to hide her face. Hands rested on the keys, pale and thin. But as my light touched her, she vanished, leaving only the empty bench. The music did not falter. I stumbled into the corridor, forcing distance between myself and that cursed sound. Yet the melody followed, bleeding through the walls, no softer for the space between us. Every step I took was echoed by a chord, every breath answered by a note. It was as though the house itself had become the instrument, and I its reluctant audience. The corridor forked ahead. One way led upward toward the staircase, the other down into deeper shadow. I hesitated, and in that pause the music shifted, growing softer, coaxing, almost tender, as if urging me to follow its call. I chose the stairs, running 2 at a time, desperate for higher ground, for an escape into air that might not sing. But even as I climbed, the melody rose with me, each chord vibrating through the banister, through the frame of the house, through my chest. When I reached the landing and turned toward a window, praying for some view of the world beyond, the music stopped again. The silence pressed close. I dared a breath of relief, and a single note struck directly behind me. The note behind me was sharp, deliberate, like a fingernail raking against glass. My body locked. The air on the landing felt heavy, pressing against my chest. Slowly, against every plea from my instincts, I turned. At the far end of the hallway stood the piano. It could not have been there. The drawing room was 2 floors below. Yet its bulk filled the corridor, keys gleaming pale in the half-light. And on the bench sat a figure. Her back was to me, hair cascading down like a curtain of shadow. She leaned forward, long fingers resting lightly on the keys. My breath caught as her shoulders moved, rising and falling in slow rhythm, as though she breathed in time with the melody. She struck another note. The sound rang out, echoing through the house, then another, and another, forming the fragile skeleton of a tune. Each key pressed was deliberate, patient, waiting for me to listen. I stepped back, the stair beneath my heel groaning. The sound betrayed me. Her head twitched, not turning fully, but jerking slightly to the side, as though the sound had snagged her attention. My pulse thundered. "Hello?" My voice cracked in the thick air. The woman did not answer. She only placed both hands on the keys. And then the music began again. It was no hesitant exercise now. Her fingers flew, the melody surging into a furious dance. The air shook with the violence of it. The wallpaper quivered. The lamps rattled on their hooks. The very banister beneath my hand vibrated in harmony. I turned to flee down the stairs, but the steps warped under me. Wood groaned, softening like wax, my boots sinking into them as though they wished to hold me. I wrenched free, nearly falling, and sprinted down the corridor instead, away from her, away from the music. but every direction led me back. I ran left, finding myself again at the stairs. I ran right, only to return to the same corridor, the same window, the same impossible piano. The house had become a maze, shifting with the notes, guiding me in endless circles. The melody swelled higher, faster, until it filled my skull. My vision blurred, my knees weakened. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside me, rattling my bones. Then silence. I lowered my hands cautiously. The woman sat still at the piano, head bowed. Slowly, with a creak of stiff joints, she began to turn. Her face was hidden at first by the veil of her hair, but as she turned further, the strands parted, and I wished they hadn't. There were no features, only smooth skin, pale and stretched like porcelain pulled too thin. Where eyes should have been were shallow hollows, empty and black. Her mouth was a gash, wide and unbroken, curving into something like a smile. She stood. Her hands never left the keys, yet the music continued, louder than before. Notes thundered as though played by invisible hands, each chord striking in rhythm with her steps. I stumbled backward. My shoulder struck the wall. Paint cracked under the impact, dust spilling down. She advanced, slow and certain, her faceless head tilted toward me. I bolted, choosing the stairs once more, despite the warping wood. My boots stuck, tore free, stuck again. The melody pursued, rising in violence, until it felt like the house itself screamed in music. Halfway down the staircase, I risked a glance back. She was not following on foot. She was gliding, weightless, her toes never touching the boards. And still the piano played, relentless, each note a hammer against my chest. I reached the ground floor at last, flinging myself toward the front door. My hands tore at the rusted lock, my breath ragged. Behind me, the music crescendoed into chaos. All keys struck at once, a storm of sound that bent the air. The lock groaned, the door rattled. Then, just as I pulled it open, the music stopped. I froze, trembling in the sudden void. A whisper, soft, almost gentle, slid through the silence. "Stay." The whisper clung to the air like smoke, but the silence that followed was heavier still. My hand gripped the doorframe, my knuckles white. The hallway behind me lay empty, the piano gone, the faceless woman nowhere to be seen. I forced the door wider. Cold night air rushed against my face, sharp and clean compared to the stale breath of the house. Relief burst through me, fragile but powerful. I stepped outside, boots crunching against gravel. The wind sighed across the hillside, tugging at my coat. I was free. I hurried down the cracked path, glancing only once over my shoulder. The house stood silent, windows blank, its shadow stretched long against the sky. Nothing moved. No music followed. My chest loosened with each step I took away from it. The night was alive again, crickets calling, the rustle of dry grass, the distant bark of a dog. Normal sounds, blessedly normal. By the time I reached the base of the hill, my breath had steadied. I stopped, resting a hand on a leaning fence post, and laughed softly to myself. Fear does strange things, I told myself. Old houses echo with memory. My mind had woven shadows and creaks into something more. That was all. I pulled my phone from my pocket, eager for the glow of its screen. This time it lit without hesitation. The signal bars returned, time glowing steady, everything normal, too normal. I took comfort in it anyway, pressing onward down the narrow road toward the village. Yet, as I walked, the night seemed oddly hollow. The crickets fell silent one by one. The wind dropped until the fields lay utterly still. The hush grew too deep, pressing against me like the inside of the house had. I slowed, glancing around. The road stretched empty behind me. The hillside loomed above, the house a dark silhouette against the clouds. And then I heard it, a single piano note, faint, distant, but unmistakable. I froze, staring back at the house. No light burned in its windows, yet the note came again, louder, carried on the air as though the wind itself played messenger. I stumbled back a step, shaking my head. No, I left you. Another note followed, joined by two more, forming the beginnings of that same faltering melody. The sound didn't fade with distance, it grew. Each step I took down the road was echoed by another chord, stronger, nearer. I broke into a run, panic clawing up my throat. My boots struck the cracked road in frantic rhythm, but the music matched me, chords crashing with each stride. The hillside fell away behind me, yet the sound clung, swelling until it felt as though invisible hands played the sky itself. By the time I stumbled into the first edge of the village, I was gasping, trembling, but the streets lay empty, shutters drawn, houses dark, and over it all, faint but constant, the piano played on. I pressed myself against a stone wall, dragging in air, trying to believe I was safe. The music dimmed then, softening to almost nothing, as though it had finally retreated. My heartbeat slowed. Perhaps I thought I had outrun it after all. But from the darkened window beside me, a sound rose, a soft, deliberate note struck on unseen keys. The note from the window shivered through me like a blade of ice. My body locked, ears straining, eyes fixed on the black pane. No light burned behind the glass, only my own distorted reflection staring back. Then another note followed, lower, resonant, and the reflection wavered, rippling as though water lay between us. I stumbled backward into the empty street. The village lay dead, each house shuttered, every lamp unlit. Yet from the walls, from the windows, from the very stones underfoot, the music grew. A melody halting at first, then surging with confidence. It rolled through the narrow lanes like a tide, drowning all silence, leaving no space untouched. I broke into a run. My footsteps echoed too loud in the deserted streets, swallowed almost instantly by the rising chords. The houses leaned close on either side, windows multiplying, each one a dark mouth whispering sound. From behind shutters, from cracks in the doors, the piano rang until the village itself seemed to play. I turned corners blindly, desperate for escape, but the streets folded back on themselves, leading me in circles. Always the same cobbles, the same crooked well, the same blind windows. The music chased me relentlessly, swelling in triumph at my panic. At last, the road opened to a small square. In its center stood another piano. Upright, varnish dulled, keys pale in the moonlight. A bench waited before it, and seated there, her. The woman from the house. Hair black as pitch, spilling down her back, hiding her face. Her hands hovered above the keys, and though she never moved them, the melody raged on, pouring from the piano, from the houses, from the very air. I froze, chest heaving, sweat cold against my skin. Her faceless head turned slightly, acknowledging me without eyes. The gash of a mouth curved, too wide, stretching in silent mockery. The music surged to a deafening peak. I clutched my ears, but the sound was inside me, rattling my bones, hammering my chest in violent rhythm. My heartbeat faltered, sinking to the furious chords. Each thud threatened to tear me apart from within. "No," I gasped. "Not me!" I stumbled forward, seized by an impulse to smash the piano, to break the cursed vessel of sound. I hurled myself at it, fists striking wood, splinters biting my knuckles, but the melody did not falter. The woman sat unmoved, her hands still hovering, her faceless head tilted as if amused. The keys erupted, slamming down all at once. The force threw me backward, crashing me against the stones, my vision blurred with stars. I rolled onto my side, gasping, and saw the cracks spreading across the cobbles beneath me. Music spilled from those cracks now, each fracture a mouth-belching sound. The square trembled, buildings groaning as if shaken from their roots. I crawled, desperate, nails scraping stone, dragging myself toward the far archway that might lead beyond this cursed place. The ground split. Dust filled the air, thick and choking. Through it I glimpsed her rising from the bench. She moved without weight, gliding, her head lifting until the hollows of her face fixed on me. The music twisted then, less melody now, more scream, a storm of discord that battered me with invisible fists. I staggered to my feet and ran. My legs felt alien, heavy as lead, but terror drove me. I plunged through the archway into a narrow lane that sloped downward. The music pursued, crashing from wall to wall, rattling shutters, cracking plaster. Ahead, faint and impossible, I saw the glow of dawn. The sky paling, clouds tinged with grey. Salvation. I forced myself onward, lungs aflame, legs trembling. Behind me, the village shook with collapsing walls, the piano's cry ripping stone and timber apart. At last, I burst free into the open fields. Grass bent beneath my boots, the earth solid, the air clean. The first light of morning touched the horizon, weak but real. And with it, silence fell. I collapsed, rolling onto my back, chest heaving, eyes wet with relief. No music, no faceless woman, only the dawn chorus of birds beginning, tentative and fragile. I laughed, ragged, broken, but alive. I had escaped, or so I believed. The first light of morning spread across the field, softening the jagged outline of the hill behind me. I kept my eyes on that glow, desperate to anchor myself to something ordinary. Birds sang tentatively, their fragile calls filling the spaces where the music had been. Each sound was a blessing. I pulled my phone from my pocket, hands trembling. Its screen lit immediately, showing the time. 6:01, battery full, signal steady. I laughed, a sound sharp with relief. The nightmare had ended, then the screen flickered. The background image dissolved, replaced by a black surface. Lines appeared, white, thin, perfectly spaced. Keys. A piano stretched across my screen, its ivory gleaming. I dropped the phone, but the music returned before it struck the grass. A single note, faint but clear, rang out, not from the device, but from the air itself. I staggered back, eyes wide, as another note followed, then another, building into that same broken melody. The birds fell silent. I turned toward the hill. The house stood in silhouette, its windows bright now, glowing faintly as though dawn burned from within. And from the open doorway drifted a shadowed figure. She stepped onto the path, faceless, gliding, hair spilling across her shoulders. The melody grew louder, filling the field, filling my chest. My heartbeat faltered, trying to match its tempo. I stumbled backward, whispering to myself, "No, I left you behind." But the music answered, rolling across the open ground like thunder. And when I looked down, the grass beneath me was trembling in rhythm, each blade bowing as though struck by invisible keys. I descended the crumbling steps because silence in the earth feels different, thicker, older, and I wanted to know what it would sound like. The tunnel mouth yawned before me, a black wound cut into stone, its edges slick with moss. Rusted railings lined the stairwell, their surfaces flaking into red dust beneath my grip. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. The sound of the city faded quickly. No traffic, no voices, no wind, only the slow drip of unseen water striking stone. Each drop echoed, stretching into long seconds as though the tunnel was swallowing time itself. My torch beams swept across the walls, tiles cracked and blackened with damp, graffiti half erased by mold, cables dangling like veins. The smell was sharp, metallic, with a sour undertone of rot. When I reached the platform at the bottom, I stood still, waiting.
For a moment there was nothing but the faint hum of silence. Then I heard it, soft, distant, yet clear. Footsteps, not mine, measured, deliberate, striking the tunnel floor with a slow rhythm. One step, pause, another step. I turned sharply, torch cutting across the dark. But the platform was empty. The sound came again, a firm tap on stone, as though a heavy boot had struck the tunnel floor. My torchlight jittered across the tiles, catching only damp streaks and peeling paint. I held my breath, ears straining, but the silence that followed was complete. So complete, I almost believed I'd imagined it. I took a cautious step forward, my own boot scuffing against grit. The noise echoed too loudly, bouncing back at me from the walls. My pulse quickened. That must have been what I'd heard earlier, I reasoned. An echo thrown back, distorted by the hollow chamber. Yet the explanation felt brittle. I reached the edge of the platform, sweeping my torch along the dark line of the tunnel. The beam dissolved after a few meters, swallowed by a curtain of black. Dust floated in the air, drifting like pale ash. I waited, hoping for ordinary sounds. A rat skittering, water dripping, anything. Nothing came. Then another footstep. This one closer, sharper, and undeniably separate from my own. I spun, torch jerking, but the platform remained empty. My throat tightened. I whispered aloud, testing the air. Hello?
The word echoed down the tunnel, repeating itself until it was unrecognizable, swallowed by distance. For a long moment there was nothing. Then a single footstep answered, perfectly timed, as though mocking me. My hands trembled on the torch. The silence that followed was heavier, pressing close against my ears. I forced myself to breathe, to move. Perhaps I was only chasing shadows of sound, magnified by nerves. I descended from the platform onto the tracks, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots oddly comforting. The tunnel stretched before me, a black throat lined with rails that vanished into infinity. I walked slowly, my torch chasing shadows across the curved walls. My breath fogged faintly in the cold air. I told myself I was here for research, for truth, not for fear, but still I could not shake the sensation of being followed. When I paused, the echo of my footsteps lingered too long, a fraction of a second longer than it should have, as if another set of feet fell just behind, mimicking me with precise delay. I tested it deliberately, taking 3 quick steps, then stopping dead. Tap, 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 and then one more. A 4th step, out of time, too late, landing in the silence I had left behind. I turned sharply, heart hammering, torch cutting across the empty platform behind me. Nothing moved, the tiles glistened, the silence yawned wider. But the truth pressed itself against my skin. I was not alone in the tunnel. The 4th step still rang in my skull as I pressed deeper into the tunnel. My torch beam swayed across cracked tiles, catching rivulets of water that glistened like veins. The air was colder now, thick with the scent of rust and mold. Each breath felt like inhaling damp cloth. I told myself the noise was only the echo, a trick of acoustics. Yet my body betrayed me. My pulse hammered faster, my shoulders tightening with every stride. I quickened my pace, but the sound behind me matched perfectly, boots striking gravel a heartbeat after mine. Tap, 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 pause, tap. The rhythm circled me, growing louder, closer, until I could almost feel the weight of another presence at my back. I spun suddenly, torch slicing through the dark. The tunnel behind lay empty, rails stretching into nothing. Still the echo came again, one deliberate step, as though mocking my fear. I forced myself forward, jaw clenched, torchlight trembling with each shake of my hand. The further I walked, the less of the city seemed to exist above me. The world shrank to stone, shadow, and the measured cadence of phantom steps. Then the other sounds began to fade. First, the dripping water, which had marked the silence with steady patience, fell still. Then the faint hum of air moving through cracks in the ceiling ceased. Even my own footsteps dulled, absorbed by the tunnel walls until only the second rhythm remained, bold and clear. The phantom was not echoing anymore, it was leading. I realized this when I paused, holding myself perfectly still, lungs aching as I held my breath. And yet the sound continued, 3 steps, steady, measured, vanishing into the darkness ahead. The torch beam quivered. My rational mind strained for answers. Perhaps some drifter had taken the tunnels, another night wanderer like me. But the cadence was too controlled, too deliberate, as though the sound itself were aware of my listening. I followed, half unwilling, half compelled. The steps always remained just ahead, close enough to promise presence, but never revealing form. The tunnel curved slowly, its walls slick with black mold. My boots crunched against gravel, but the phantom sound drowned them out, filling the silence like a guide or a lure. Then my torch flickered. Once, twice, and the light dimmed to a weak glow. I shook it, panic rising. The beams sputtered back, weaker but holding. And in that moment of near darkness I swore I saw movement, a figure, pale and bent, retreating into the shadows. I froze, heart crashing against my ribs. The sound stopped too. The silence pressed close, suffocating, louder than any noise. Then, from directly behind me, a footstep fell. I spun, torch jerking wildly, empty tunnel. My breath tore from my throat in ragged bursts. The sound came again. Another step closer, heavy as if the very earth strained beneath it. The air thickened, hot and cold at once, brushing my skin with invisible weight. Then all at once, the tunnel erupted with noise. Dozens of footsteps, racing, circling, running along the walls, the ceiling, the floor. My ears filled with the chaos of pursuit, though no shape revealed itself to my eyes. My torch flickered madly, shadows leaping, stretching, swallowing the walls. I broke into a run, desperate to escape the cacophony. My boots pounded the rails, the phantom strides, chasing, gaining, surrounding. The tunnel narrowed, pressing close, the air alive with breath that was not my own. And above the storm of footsteps came another sound, low, guttural, the rasp of something breathing, slow, wet, hungry. It came from ahead. The breath ahead of me was thick, labored, dragging through the tunnel like an animal forcing air through a broken throat. My legs faltered, yet I kept running, the sound of 100 phantom footsteps at my back, propelling me forward. My torch beam jittered across the black tiles, catching the glitter of damp stone, the broken teeth of rails jutting from gravel. Then it found movement. A shadow peeled itself from the wall. At first, I thought it a trick of light, the way mist or dampness shifts when struck by a wavering beam. But then it bent forward on 4 limbs, each arm long and jointed too many times, each leg bent wrong. Its body dragged low, shoulders heaving with the rasp of that terrible breath. I froze, chest tight. The phantom steps suddenly silenced behind me. The tunnel became still, every echo absorbed into the thick air. Only the creature moved, its hands long skeletal, clawing into gravel with slow, deliberate scrapes. I took 1 step back. Its head snapped up at the sound. There was no face, only a smooth, pale surface, skin stretched taut, marred by a single slit that opened and closed as it breathed. The rasp was louder now, wet and shuddering, filling the tunnel like a second atmosphere. Panic burst through me. I bolted, torch beam jerking wildly, casting fractured light that barely touched the walls. Behind me, claws tore into gravel, a rapid scramble that kept pace with my sprint. The tunnel roared with noise again, footsteps crashing along the ceiling, racing at impossible angles. My ears rang with them, disoriented, unable to tell if the sounds were ahead or behind, real or phantom. I reached a junction where the tunnel split into two. The left path sloped deeper, swallowed by thick shadow. The right twisted upward, tiles crumbling, cables dangling like roots. I chose right, lungs tearing, every muscle screaming. The rasping grew louder. I risked a glance back and nearly tripped. The creature was climbing the walls, limbs splayed at impossible angles, body jerking but swift, its faceless head tilted toward me. My torchlight glimmered off its pale skin, slick with moisture. I forced myself onward, every stride a prayer. The path narrowed, ceiling dropping low, forcing me to duck as I ran. My breath scraped raw in my throat, torch beam quivering. The phantom footsteps had ceased again, leaving only the frantic scrabble of claws closing in. Then the ceiling opened into a larger chamber, an abandoned service platform. Rusted benches leaned against the wall, half collapsed. Old posters clung in strips, their colours long, bled away. A stagnant pool spread across the centre, black and stinking. I stumbled in, boots splashing. The echo exploded, water slapping against the tiles. And behind me, the creature lunged into the chamber, landing on all fours with a sickening crack of limbs. It screeched, not a roar, not a cry, but a chorus of footsteps all at once, hammered into one terrible sound. My skull throbbed with it, my body flinching against the vibration. I backed away, torch beam locked on its faceless head. It prowled low, arms reaching, claws scraping sparks from stone. The slit in its face widened, the rasping breath becoming a hiss that rattled the stagnant water. I hit the far wall, nowhere left to go. My legs trembled, the torch shaking violently in my grip. The creature stopped a few feet away, crouched, head tilting in quick insect-like jerks. It was waiting, I realized, watching, measuring, and then it moved. It lunged with sudden speed, claws striking the tiles, body propelled forward in a blur of pale limbs. I dove sideways at the last instant, crashing into a rusted bench. Metal shrieked as it collapsed beneath me. My torch flew from my hand, clattering across the floor, its beams spinning wildly. The creature skidded, claws raking sparks, then turned with jerking grace. My torchlight froze on its head as it rose onto its hind limbs, towering, faceless slit, opening wide in a soundless scream. The creature's scream never came. Its slit of a mouth opened impossibly wide, yet the tunnel filled only with silence, thick and crushing. My own pulse was the only sound, hammering in my ears as I crouched among the twisted remains of the bench. Then suddenly it stopped moving. The pale limbs froze mid-motion, claws hovering just above the tiles. Its faceless head tilted, jerking once, twice, as though listening for something beyond me. I held my breath, terrified that even the smallest sound would break whatever spell held it still. A long moment passed. Then slowly, the creature lowered itself, limbs folding with unnatural grace, and slid back into the shadows at the far end of the chamber. Its pale skin vanished into the black, as though it had never been there at all. I remained crouched, muscles shaking until the silence stretched too long. At last, I forced myself up, snatched the torch from the wet floor, and shone it frantically around. Nothing, no breath, no scrape, no hint of pale skin in the gloom. The chamber was empty. Relief flooded me, sharp and dizzying. My knees threatened to give, but I steadied myself against the wall, gulping down the foul air. I told myself I had survived, that whatever nightmare had stalked me had chosen to leave. The silence felt heavy but ordinary now, just the stillness of a place long abandoned. I found a maintenance ladder bolted to the wall, rusted but intact, leading upward into a narrow shaft. The thought of escape spurred me. I gripped the rungs, slick with moisture, and began to climb. Each step up felt like a step away from madness. The higher I went, the more certain I became that the worst was behind me. My breath steadied, my mind already grasping at rational explanations, exhaustion, hallucination, the brain inventing figures in the dark. I would leave this place, write about it, and laugh at how fear had twisted shadows into monsters. I reached a rusted hatch and pushed. It resisted at first, then groaned open, spilling me into another corridor. This one was narrower, drier, lined with rusting pipes. A faint current of air brushed my face, fresh air. It meant an exit couldn't be far. Relief swelled once more, almost painful in its intensity. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. My torch beam wavered, dimming as the batteries weakened, but I hardly cared. The sound of my breathing was steady. No footsteps echoed mine, no whispers threaded the air. I almost smiled, but then I realized there were no ordinary sounds either, no dripping water, no scurrying rats, no hum of distant ventilation. The silence was total again, as suffocating as before. My smile faltered. I lifted the torch with trembling hands, sweeping it across the corridor. At first, nothing. Then I noticed the pipes along the wall. They were vibrating, subtle but undeniable. A sound crawled up through the metal, soft, familiar, footsteps, measured, deliberate, one after another, running through the pipes like veins. I backed away, pulse racing, torch beam trembling. The sound grew louder, spreading through the corridor walls, beneath the floor, above the ceiling, steps overlapping, countless feet pacing in every direction at once. And then, beneath it all, the rasping breath returned, slow, wet, impossibly close. I spun, torch beam flashing down the corridor ahead. For the briefest instant, I thought I saw pale limbs unfolding from the shadow, claws glinting wet. But when I blinked, it was gone. The silence returned for half a heartbeat, so deep I could hear my blood in my ears. Then, just behind me, a single footstep fell. The footstep behind me cracked the silence like a gunshot. My chest seized, breath stuck halfway, and I turned slowly, torch beam quivering in my trembling hand. The corridor was empty. Pipes lined the walls like ribs, glistening faintly with damp. The rust shimmered under my shaking light. Nothing moved, yet the air was wrong, dense, watching. I forced a breath past my dry throat and stepped backward, keeping the beam steady. Another step fell, perfectly timed with mine, not an echo, a reply. I broke into a run. My boots pounded the concrete, the torch bouncing wildly, light scattering across metal and shadow. The footsteps answered instantly, heavier, faster, slamming down behind me in cruel mimicry. Each stride felt closer, pressing hot breath against the back of my neck. The corridor stretched too long, impossibly long, walls tightening around me. My lungs burned, my vision blurred. Still I ran, driven by sheer panic. The sound of claws scraping stone joined the rhythm. First one set, then two, then countless, until it seemed an army crawled just out of sight, chasing me through the dark. The rasping breath swelled into a roar, wet and animal, filling the corridor with its hunger. I stumbled, caught myself on the wall, and plunged forward. My torch flickered, dying, the beam shrinking to a weak glow. In that fading light I glimpsed movement, pale limbs sprawling across the ceiling, dragging the faceless creature alongside me like a grotesque spider. Its slit mouth gaped wide, spilling a hiss that made my teeth ache. "No! No!" My voice cracked, raw with terror. I sprinted harder, the corridor bending suddenly, opening into a wider chamber. My boots splashed into shallow water, the stench of rot choking my lungs. Old tracks stretched across the floor, rusted but intact, vanishing into the black maw of another tunnel. The footsteps multiplied, circling the chamber, running on ceiling and walls. My ears rang with them, my skull vibrating under their weight. The rasping came again, so close it might have been inside me. And then from the far tunnel, light, faint, yellow, flickering like an old lantern. Hope exploded in my chest. I hurled myself toward it. water sloshing at my boots, rails rattling beneath my steps. The noise behind surged, a tidal wave of claws and breath, furious at my attempt to flee. The light grew brighter, spilling into the chamber. It swung gently as though carried by a hand, but no figure held it. The lantern floated alone, bobbing mid-air, casting distorted shadows across the dripping walls. I stopped, heart breaking in my chest. The footsteps ceased. The silence returned, sharp and absolute. The lantern hung still, its glow steady now, waiting. Then the rasping began again, directly in front of me. From the lantern's light, a shape unfolded, limbs too long, body bent, faceless head tilting. The slit mouth opened, a chorus of footsteps screamed from it, 1,000 strides at once, hammering against my ears. I fell to my knees, hands clamped over my skull, torch clattering away, my vision filled with white, the sound too much, shattering thought. I felt claws brush my shoulder, cold and sharp, dragging down toward my chest. Some primal instinct exploded inside me. I lurched forward, grabbed the lantern and hurled it with all my strength. The glass shattered against the wall. Fire spilled outward, weak but real, catching on the damp mold, flaring brighter than it should have. The creature shrieked, not with footsteps now, but with raw, guttural sound. It reeled, limbs jerking, body collapsing into shadow. The chamber blazed with sudden light, every corner alive with flame. I staggered through the heat, lungs burning, eyes streaming. The tunnel beyond glowed faintly with open air. I ran, stumbling, coughing, dragging myself along the rails. Behind me, the shrieks echoed, clawing at my spine, but I did not look back. The fire roared higher, filling the chamber with furious light. At last, the tunnel narrowed. A staircase rose ahead, broken but solid, leading upward. I clambered, hands slipping on rust, legs trembling. The shrieks faded behind me, muffled by stone, replaced by the blessed sound of wind. I burst through a rusted grate into the night. The city stretched above, quiet streets under a pale dawn. Air rushed into my lungs, cold and clean. I collapsed onto the pavement, body racked with sobs of relief. I had escaped the tunnel. But as the wind brushed my ears, I froze. Because beneath its sigh, faint but steady, I heard it again. Footsteps. I lay on the cracked pavement, lungs heaving, the first light of dawn painting the sky a bruised grey. Every muscle trembled, but relief seeped through me. The tunnel was behind me now, sealed in stone and fire. Whatever had crawled there could not follow. I pushed myself upright, leaning against the rusted grate I had forced open. The street was empty. The world above seemed too quiet, but quiet in the way of an early city morning, not the suffocating hush of the tunnels. I almost laughed with exhaustion. I was safe. I pulled my phone from my pocket, its screen cracked but alive. The time blinked steady, battery low but real. A tether to the world I knew. I pressed the device against my chest, savouring its glow. Then the sound came again. At first, faint, almost beneath notice. A step. Another. Measured. Deliberate. I froze, head lifting slowly. The street stretched empty in both directions, cobbles slick with dew. Yet the footsteps grew clearer, echoing from no source, falling perfectly in rhythm with my heartbeat. I stumbled backward, pressing myself to the wall. The grate behind me rattled once, as though something deep below had shifted. The footsteps did not fade. They drew closer, circling though the street remained bare. And then, without warning, they stopped. The silence pressed tight. My chest tightened with it. From the cracked screen of my phone, distorted text flickered into being. Just 3 words. Still behind you. The device buzzed violently in my hand, and from directly over my shoulder, hot and wet, came a single, rasping breath. I came to the church because silence inside stone walls feels sacred, and I wanted to know what lingered when the bells were gone. The building rose out of the hillside like a carcass of stone, its tower broken, its stained glass windows shattered into jagged teeth. Ivy clung to the crumbling walls, twisting upward as though trying to hold the structure upright. I pushed open the heavy door. Its hinges groaned like old bones. Inside, the air was colder, heavy with the smell of dust and damp candle wax. My footsteps echoed faintly across the cracked flagstones, carrying into the hollow nave. Pews were broken, splintered wood scattered in rows that no longer guided anyone toward prayer. The altar stood bare, draped in cobwebs. My torch swept across faded murals, saints reduced to peeling fragments. At first, the silence was complete, thick, reverent, a hush that pressed against my chest. Then faintly it came. A single bell tolled, low, heavy, resonant. It rolled through the empty church, vibrating in the stone, though the tower above had no bell to ring. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The church had spoken. The toll lingered in the air long after it should have faded, rolling through the nave in waves. I stood frozen, torchlight trembling across the cracked stones. The tower had been gutted decades ago, its bell removed, its ropes rotted. No mechanism remained to make that sound. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Perhaps it was an echo from elsewhere, I told myself. Another church, far away, carried on the wind. But the air here was too still, too heavy. The sound had not drifted in, it had risen from within. I forced myself to walk forward. Each step tapped against the flagstones, the echo thin compared to the weight of that toll. My torch swept over broken pews, fragments of hymn books matted with mould, a bird's nest abandoned in the rafters. Ordinary decay. Yet the silence between these ruins pressed so tightly it made the hairs on my arms lift. At the altar, I paused, running the torch beam up the tower shaft. Empty. The wooden beams were blackened and snapped, open to the night sky. Rain dripped through the cracks, each drop faint against stone. Nothing moved above. The bell tolled again. I flinched, stumbling back. This time the sound was louder, sharper, as though struck closer to where I stood. My chest tightened. The altar trembled beneath the vibration, sending a fine mist of dust into the air. My thoughts clawed for reason, perhaps a speaker, hidden by vandals or pranksters, some device left behind, yet the sound was too heavy, too resonant, the kind that settles into your bones. My ribs buzzed with it. I turned sharply, sweeping the torch behind me. The light caught rows of pews, jagged shadows, stretching long. For an instant I thought I saw someone seated there, a figure cloaked in black, head bowed. But when the beam steadied, there was only splintered wood. I forced a laugh, thin and hollow. "It's just sound," I muttered. My voice cracked against the silence, swallowed almost instantly. The bell tolled a third time. The ground beneath me shivered, faint but real. Dust cascaded from the rafters. The mural above the altar, what little paint remained, peeled in strips, curling as though scorched by heat. I gripped the torch tighter, heart hammering. That was no distant echo, no harmless vibration. Something in this church had stirred and it was listening. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. A silence not empty, but waiting. The third toll still rattled in my ribs when the silence closed in again, heavier than before. It felt alive, as though the church itself had drawn breath and was holding it, waiting for me to move. My torchlight swayed across the nave, shadows stretching and shrinking like restless figures. I forced my legs to carry me further inside. The flagstones were slick with damp, each step landing too loudly. My breath echoed in the high vaults, small and fragile compared to the weight of the silence pressing down. I told myself that fear magnifies sound, that the bell could be explained by collapsing beams, by shifting stone. But deep down, I knew silence was listening. I passed the last row of pews and approached the altar. The murals above seemed darker now, their painted eyes watching. I shone the light across them, heart thudding, and for a moment the faces seemed fresh, colours vivid, as though the figures had been painted yesterday. I blinked, and the illusion was gone, only faded fragments remained. Then came the fourth toll. This one struck so violently the entire nave shuddered. The stained glass that clung stubbornly to the windows rattled in their frames, a single shard loosening and clattering to the floor. The sound surged through the air and then into my bones, making my knees tremble. I staggered back, pressing a hand to my chest. The toll was not just sound, it was force. And then the echoes began, not fading echoes that diminish with distance, but layered ones, as if dozens of bells rang in answer. Their tones overlapped, filling every crack of stone until the church vibrated like a struck drum. The torch in my hand quivered with the resonance, its beam jittering across the walls. My ears rang. The noise seemed to come from everywhere at once, yet also from nowhere at all. My mind clawed at it, searching for origin, but the sound was beyond direction, beyond space. Then, within the cacophony, voices emerged. Low at first, then rising, threads of whispers woven into the tolls. They spoke no words I knew, only fragments, syllables that twisted like smoke. Male and female, old and young, their tones bled into the ringing until I could not tell where the bell ended and the whispers began. I spun in circles, torch beam darting, desperate to catch movement. In the rows of pews, shadows bent unnaturally. Figures flickered into being, only to vanish when the light touched them. A laugh echoed then, thin, reedy, childlike, riding atop the tolls. My heart lurched. The sound came from behind me, directly at my ear. I whipped the torch around, but there was only empty air, motes of dust drifting in the beam. The tolling quickened, the rhythm tightening. My pulse followed it unwillingly, beating in synchrony. Each strike seemed closer, as though the invisible bell were descending from the towerless void, lowering itself into the nave. My vision blurred, my teeth rattled with the vibration. The whispers grew louder, clearer, until I could almost form words. Almost. My mind recoiled, refusing to give shape to the language. Then suddenly silence again. It was worse than the tolling. The air hung expectant, heavy, like the pause before a final note. My ears rang with the absence, and I realized my hands were shaking violently, the torch beams scribbling across the stone. From the shadows near the altar, a new sound rose, not a bell, not a whisper. Footsteps, measured, slow, approaching. The footsteps struck the flagstones with a weight that no echo could mimic. Deliberate, patient, each one rang through the nave, unhurried yet heavy enough to make my pulse stumble. I raised the torch, its beam trembling across the empty aisle. At first, nothing moved, only splintered pews and crumbling stone. But the sound continued, closer now, each step aligning perfectly with my heartbeat. "Who's there?" My voice cracked in the vast chamber, brittle against the silence that swallowed it whole. The answer came not in words, but in another toll. It reverberated directly above me. I flinched, swinging the torch upward. The tower was broken, open to the night sky, yet the sound had dropped from its hollow like a hammer. Dust rained down, fine and grey, sifting into my hair. When I lowered the beam again, I saw it. A figure stood at the far end of the nave, framed in the fractured light from the broken windows. Cloaked in black, its outline was thin, elongated, as though the body beneath the cloth was stretched wrong. Its head was bowed, unmoving. The footsteps had ceased. The silence was immense. I forced one step forward, the torch quivering in my grip. "Why are you here?" The figure lifted its head. Where a face should have been, there was only smooth, stone-grey skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, only a flat surface, polished and lifeless. Yet I felt its gaze, sharp and searing, pressing into me. Then, without moving its legs, it was closer. I stacked. The toll inside my skull rang so sharply I thought my bones would splinter. I staggered through the darkness, palms scraping stone, searching for the heavy doors. My torch was dead, my only light, the thin glow of the moon through shattered glass. At last, my hands met wood. I pushed hard. The doors resisted, hinges groaning, then gave way with a moan that echoed into the night. Cold air washed over me, sharp and clean, sweeping away the suffocating press of whispers. I stumbled outside, collapsing onto the steps. The world beyond felt blessedly alive, wind rustling through grass, the chirp of a lone night insect. Ordinary sounds, the tolling had stopped. I laughed, a cracked, broken sound, but it was real. I had escaped. For a long moment I sat there, gulping air, staring at the ruined graveyard that spread before the church. Weathered stones leaned at odd angles, some half swallowed by weeds. The silence was still heavy, but natural now, open, expansive, no longer clinging like a weight. I rose unsteadily, forcing myself down the slope toward the village road. My legs trembled, but each step away from the church loosened the coil of fear. Soon, I told myself, I'd see lights, hear voices, feel the warmth of living company. Halfway down, I stopped. The wind had fallen still. The insect's chirp was gone. The silence had returned, total, suffocating. I turned back toward the church. Its black silhouette loomed on the hill, tower broken, windows hollow. The doors stood ajar, swaying slightly, though no breeze moved. Then the sound came again. Not the toll this time, but something softer. A murmur? Faint, like dozens of voices speaking at once, layered and indistinct. It drifted down the hillside, seeping between the gravestones, curling around me like smoke. I stumbled backward, shaking my head. No, I left you. The murmurs grew clearer, forming a rhythm, a chant without words. The gravestones began to vibrate, dust trickling from their weathered carvings, weeds shivered though the air was still. Panic surged. I turned to run, crashing through the grass toward the road. Each stride seemed to drag, the ground thick beneath my boots, as though unseen hands clutched my ankles. My breath came in ragged bursts, then silence again. I slowed, daring to hope. The road stretched ahead, pale under the moon. The village lights glimmered faintly in the distance. Relief broke through, fragile but intoxicating. I laughed again, this time with tears in my eyes. It was over. The church and its whispers had let me go, but then a shadow fell across the road. I looked up. There, at the bend ahead, stood a figure, cloaked, still, head bowed. I froze, breath torn from my throat. My legs refused to move. Slowly the figure raised its head. The face was flat, featureless, stone pale. And in the silence that followed, the toll rang again, low, heavy. Inside me, the toll reverberated through my body, deeper than sound, striking marrow and nerve. I staggered, clutching my chest, vision blurring with each pulse of invisible force. Ahead, the cloaked figure stood unmoving, its faceless head tilted in silent judgment. I forced a step backward, boots crunching gravel. The figure responded instantly, without movement, without sound. It was closer. One blink and the distance between us halved. My lungs seized. No! My voice cracked into the night. The toll rang again, louder. The gravestones lining the road rattled, one toppling with a dull thud. Dust shivered from the hillside, drifting like pale smoke. My ears rang until I thought they would burst. The figure glided forward, cloak dragging across the road without touching it. Its faceless head lifted higher, the pale surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight. I turned and ran. The toll followed, each strike shaking the earth. cracking the old stones under my boots. My legs burned, lungs seared, but terror pushed me. The village lights grew brighter, trembling through the haze of tears. If I could just reach them, if I could just find another living soul. The toll struck again, louder, closer. The road heaved beneath me, stones splitting like brittle bones. I stumbled, nearly falling. Behind, the figure loomed larger, impossibly swift, though it took no steps. The air thickened, pressing against my back, each toll pulling me toward it like a tide. I forced myself onward, heart hammering in painful rhythm with the sound. My chest screamed, every breath ragged. Then suddenly the road ended. The earth had collapsed, a sinkhole yawning wide where the path should have continued. Jagged edges of stone framed a pit that descended into black. I skidded to a stop, gravel spraying into the void. The toll struck again, hurling dust and rock into the air. Behind me, the figure waited, silent, faceless, the very air around it humming with power. Trapped. I edged back from the pit, eyes darting wildly for escape. None. Only the abyss ahead, the figure behind, and the toll pounding like a war drum in my skull. The whispers returned then, threading through the tolls. They came from the graves, from the stones, from the very earth. Countless voices chanting, layered and broken, yet forming a single phrase. Poor. My legs weakened. The pit seemed to lean towards me, dragging me closer with each toll. Pebbles slid from beneath my boots, vanishing into the black. Desperation surged. I turned, snatching a shard of stone from the ground, and hurled it at the figure. It passed through the cloak, striking nothing, clattering uselessly behind. The figure tilted its head, unimpressed. The toll thundered again, so violent it drove me to my knees. Blood filled my ears, hot and sharp. The voices chanted louder, faster, commanding, fall, fall, fall. The pit yawned wider, or seemed to. My vision swam, the edges blackening. The figure loomed closer, cloak spreading like wings of shadow. The toll rose to its climax, every strike tearing through me. In a final act of panic, I turned and hurled myself sideways into the weeds that lined the road. My body crashed through brittle stems rolling down the slope. Stones and thorns tore my skin, but the impact was real, grounding, pulling me from the pit's pull. I tumbled until I struck a fence post, pain exploding through my ribs. I lay gasping, eyes wide, ears ringing. The toll continued above, shaking the earth, but weaker now, muffled by distance. Through blurred vision, I saw the village. Its windows glowed with fragile yellow light. Life, people, reality. I staggered to my feet, clutching my side, and limped toward it. Each step was agony, but the lights grew closer, brighter. The toll behind me faded, the whispers thinning into silence. At last I stumbled onto cobblestones, collapsing against a wall. A lamp burned overhead, steady and warm. My body shook with sobs of relief. I had escaped the church, or so I thought. The lamplight above me hummed faintly, a fragile reminder that the world was still ordinary. I pressed my back against the cold wall, chest heaving, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. The village was quiet but alive, shutters closed, chimneys dark, yet undeniably real. I told myself I had survived. My phone buzzed weakly in my pocket. With shaking hands, I pulled it free. The cracked screen flickered, then steadied, displaying the time. Normal, solid, relief loosened my chest. Then the screen glitched. The numbers dissolved, replaced by a single word, repeated across the display in stark letters. Toll. I dropped the phone as though it burned me. It struck the cobblestones, yet the wording still glowed through the fractured glass. And then the sound came, faint at first, a single bell toll, low and deliberate, rolling through the village streets. I froze, every muscle locking. There was no tower here, no bell to ring, but the sound swelled, vibrating the shutters, rattling the lamppost, until the entire square hummed with its force.
I looked up, heart hammering. The windows around me glowed brighter, one by one, until every house in the village burned with pale, unnatural light. Shadows gathered in the frames, dozens of figures cloaked and faceless, heads bowed in unison. The bell tolled again. This time it came from inside my chest, tearing through bone and breath. I gasped, collapsing to my knees, hands clutched to my ribs. And from every window, in voices that were not human, the chant began. All. I came to the lighthouse because its light had never gone out, not in 100 years, and I wanted to know what it was watching for. The sea pressed hard against the cliffs below, waves foaming white under a bruised sky. Wind howled across the rocks, carrying salt sharp enough to sting my throat. The tower rose above me, skeletal and pale, its beacon turning in slow, patient circles. Each sweep cut across the dark like a blade, spilling through mist that clung to the horizon. No keepers lived here now. No one had since the last war. Yet the light hung still, unbroken, tireless. I pushed the heavy iron door, its hinges shrieking in protest. Inside, the air was damp and bitter, tasting of oil and rust. The spiral staircase climbed upward, vanishing into shadow. My boots struck iron with hollow clangs, each one echoing far too long. At first, it was only the sea and the wind. Then, faintly, beneath the groan of the storm, I heard something else, a whisper, not carried by wind, but circling inside the walls of the lighthouse itself.
The whisper curled around the staircase like smoke, too faint to form words, yet too deliberate to dismiss. I paused, gripping the cold iron rail, ears straining. The storm outside roared, waves battering the cliffs in relentless rhythm, but the sound within the tower seemed separate, close, confined, as though it belonged to the stone itself. I told myself it was only the wind. These walls were old, fractured with cracks where air slipped through, twisting into strange tones. A trick of weather, nothing more. Still the hair on my arms prickled and my chest tightened with unease. I climbed further. My boots clanged against the iron steps, echoing upward into the dark. With each turn of the spiral, the whisper followed, never louder, never fainter, circling with me as though keeping pace. Halfway up, I paused again, listening. This time the whisper stopped too. The silence pressed in, thick and waiting. My pulse hammered in my ears. Slowly, I took another step. The whisper returned instantly, closer now, as if it had been waiting for me to move. My throat was dry. I forced a laugh, brittle and thin. Just the wind, I muttered, though my voice cracked in the hollow chamber. The echo of my words stretched unnaturally long, bouncing back distorted. I turned the torch upward. Its beam caught the damp stone, the glisten of rusted bolts, the endless curve of the staircase. Nothing moved. Yet for a heartbeat I swore I saw a shadow ripple across the wall above, as though someone had just stepped out of sight. I gripped the rail tighter, knuckles white. The whisper deepened briefly, becoming almost a sigh, then unraveled again into meaningless breath. At last I reached the landing halfway up the tower. A door leaned crooked on its hinges, leading into what must once have been the keeper's quarters. Desperate for anything normal, I pushed it open. The hinges shrieked, and dust billowed outward. Inside, the room lay abandoned. A narrow bed slumped in the corner, mattress rotted to rags. A desk sagged beneath damp papers, their ink bled into black stains. An oil lamp lay shattered on the floor. Everything spoke of long absence, yet the air was warm, faintly stirred, as if someone had just left. The whisper drifted through the room, circling the walls, brushing my ear before slipping away. I spun, torch beam jerking, but the space was empty. Then faintly beneath the whisper I heard it, the creak of a footstep on the stairs above. The creak above was soft, almost hesitant, but it froze me where I stood. My torch beam wavered across the ruined quarters, catching dust that swirled like breath disturbed. For a moment I clung to reason. Old timbers swell with damp, storms shake stone. But the sound had carried weight, the pressure of a foot dragging wood beneath it. I moved back into the stairwell, craning upward. The spiral climbed into darkness, vanishing beyond the reach of my light. I held still, waiting. Another step, this time heavier, deliberate, echoing down the iron curve. My chest seized. Whoever it was had not hurried. The sound was measured, patient, as though aware of my listening. I called out, though my voice cracked against the walls. "Hello, is someone there?" The echo stretched unnaturally, bending my words until they came back in tones not my own. The silence afterward was worse than any reply. I climbed slowly, torch clenched tight, ears straining for every shift. The whisper swelled again, circling the walls. It no longer sounded like air slipping through cracks. It was layered now, many voices overlapping, fragments of syllables brushing one another like dry leaves. None were clear, yet together they formed a rhythm, breathing almost, or chanting too faint to understand. Each step upward tightened my chest. My boots struck iron with hollow clangs, yet every so often I heard another sound, just out of sync. A second set of steps, lighter, always a beat behind mine. I tested it, stopping abruptly. The following step came anyway. I spun, torch flashing downward. The stairs coiled into black, empty. Yet the whisper swelled, eager, like breath, pressed close to the back of my neck. I forced myself upward, half climbing, half stumbling. The storm outside bellowed against the walls, but within the tower another sound began to rise, a low hum, resonant, vibrating through the iron rail. I pressed my palm against the stone. It thrummed faintly, as though the lighthouse itself had begun to sing. The higher I climbed, the louder it became. The hum deepened into tones, long and drawn out, like a ship's horn carried across fog. They layered upon one another, shifting into a droning chorus. The air quivered with it, every breath tasting of metal and salt. My vision swam, the steps blurred. My knees weakened with each vibration that passed through me. I clung to the rail, dragging myself upward.
At last, I reached another landing. The door here was sealed, rust welded into hinges, yet the sound was stronger, pulsing from behind it. I leaned close, pressing my ear against the damp wood. A whisper hissed directly into my ear. Clear this time. Turn back. I stumbled away, torch beams scattering wildly. My heart slammed against my ribs, throat raw with a cry I hadn't realized had escaped. The whisper was gone, drowned again by the endless hum. Above, the beacon's light swept once, spilling through a narrow slit in the stone. It painted the stair in pale arcs, then vanished. The tower was still alive, still turning, though no one remained to tend it. I gritted my teeth and continued upward, every step a battle against the weight of the sand. My legs trembled, but the compulsion to reach the top drove me. To see. To know. As I climbed, the second set of footsteps returned. This time, not behind me, but above, descending. Closer. The sound of descending steps tightened my chest until it hurt to breathe. They were slow, unhurried, striking the iron with weight. My own torch beams swayed wildly as I pressed myself against the inner wall of the spiral, heart hammering. The stairwell was too narrow, too coiled. There was no place to hide. I waited, straining my ears. One step, another. The echoes stretched, bending unnaturally as if the sound were both close and impossibly far. My torch quivered on the rail. Then I saw it. A shadow moved above me, long and thin, stretching down the curve. At first, I thought it was cast by the sweeping beacon, but the angle was wrong. The light never reached this deep. The shadow bent unnaturally, limbs too long, head bowed. I staggered back, the clang of my boot ricocheting up the stairwell. Instantly, the steps stopped. Silence closed in, suffocating. I forced myself upward, each stride heavy with dread. My throat tightened with every breath, sweat cold against my back. The silence stretched, thick and waiting. Then, without warning, the steps resumed. Closer, sharper, as though the figure had leapt down entire flights in a single stride. My torch caught it for the first time. It clung to the rail, inverted, its body stretched along the underside of the stair. Limbs bent wrong, pale hands gripping the iron. Its head hung down, hair slick with seawater, face hidden. It turned toward me. The whisper surged, dozens of voices layered, spilling from where its mouth should have been. The sound filled the stairwell, pressing into my ears, forcing itself into my skull. Words formed, jagged and broken, but I understood their meaning. Keep the light. My knees buckled under the weight of the sound. The torch slipped from my hand, clattering down the steps. Darkness swallowed the stair, broken only by the faint pulse of the beacon above. I scrambled backward, palms scraping rust. The figure dropped from the rail, landing silently on the steps below. It straightened, head still bowed, cloak of water dripping from its body. It began to climb toward me. I turned and fled upward, driven by terror. My hands clutched the rail, legs burning, lungs searing. The whisper followed, a flood of voices urging, pleading, commanding. Keep the light! Keep the light! I burst onto the top landing. The door to the lantern room stood ajar, its iron hinges groaning in the storm wind. I shoved it wide and stumbled inside. The beacon loomed above, its great lens turning in steady circles. Each sweep threw pale light across the sea, endless, tireless. The machinery beneath it clanked faintly, though no hand touched it. The whispers grew louder. I turned. The figure stood in the doorway, its head lifted at last. There was no face, only a hollow void where features should have been, a black cavity that swallowed the light. From it poured the chorus of whispers, rising to a shriek. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound was inside me, vibrating bone and blood. My vision swam. The figure stepped forward, each stride jerking, unnatural. I staggered back against the lens. Its light burned cold against my spine. I was trapped, the void-faced figure advancing, the whisper shredding thought, leaving only one command echoing inside me. Keep the light. The command pulsed in my skull, 3 words that struck harder than the storm outside. I pressed myself against the cold glass of the lens, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the faceless figure as it drifted closer. The whispers bled from its hollow head, overlapping, countless, until the air itself seemed to vibrate. Then, as suddenly as they had surged, they stopped. The silence was so abrupt it rang in my ears. The figure halted in the doorway, still as stone, water dripping from its limbs to the iron floor. The beacon turned behind me, its slow sweep casting pale light across the chamber. Each time the glow passed over the figure, its body flickered as though it were only a shadow clinging to the air. My chest heaved. Inch by inch I edged sideways, circling the lens, never taking my eyes from the figure. It did not follow, it only stood, head tilted, empty face reflecting nothing. I reached the far side of the chamber and found a narrow service ladder bolted to the wall, leading up to a hatch. Escape. My hand shook as I seized the rungs and climbed, half expecting the figure to lunge at me, but it never moved. At the hatch, I shoved upward. Rusted hinges groaned, then gave way. Cold night air rushed over me, sharp with salt. I dragged myself onto the outer balcony, the sea roaring far below. The beacon's light swept over the waves, pale arcs slicing mist. Relief flooded me. I collapsed against the railing, chest heaving, lungs burning with the icy air. The whispers were gone. The figure had not followed. Only the storm remained, the crash of waves, the shriek of wind. I laughed, a sound broken but real.
I had survived. For long minutes I leaned there, letting the wind strip the terror from me. The village lights glimmered faintly along the coast, distant but steady. If I could make it down the tower, if I could reach them, I would be safe. I turned back toward the hatch. The lantern room beyond was empty. The figure was gone. I exhaled, trembling with relief, and began to descend the narrow stairs that clung to the tower's outer wall. Each step took me further from the whispers, further from the void. The storm lashed against me, rain stinging my face, but the noise was almost comforting compared to what lay above. Halfway down, I paused to rest. The sea churned far below, white foam flashing in the sweep of the beacon. My breath came steady now, the terror softening into exhaustion. I dared to believe it was over. Then the wind dropped. The storm ceased in a heartbeat, cut away as though silenced by an unseen hand. The air grew still, unnaturally still. The sea below falling silent though the waves still moved. My skin prickled, and in that suffocating quiet, the whispers returned. Faint at first, curling through the stones of the tower, threading up from the sea. They rose quickly, louder, clearer, circling the spiral of the lighthouse. My chest tightened. I gripped the rail, forcing myself to keep descending, but the voices followed, spilling into my ears with perfect clarity. "Keep the light! Keep the light!" I stumbled, nearly slipping on the wet iron. The whispers overlapped, frantic now, pressing like a tide. And beneath them came another sound, the creak of a footstep on the balcony above. Slow, heavy, following. The step above me cracked through the whispering tide, heavy and deliberate. I froze, one hand locked on the slick iron rail, the other clinging to the wall. My breath came shallow, chest tight. The sea still moved far below, but its voice was gone. The waves churned in silence. Only the whisper remained, circling the tower like a chant, broken only by that single, patient footstep. I forced myself down another rung. Metal trembled under my boots. Rain lashed across my face, cold as knives, yet even the storm had fallen mute. My pulse thundered in my ears, the only true sound left to me. Another step followed, closer this time. The balcony above groaned, iron bolts straining under weight that should not exist. My mind screamed to look up to confirm what pursued me, but some instinct deeper than reason kept my eyes fixed downward. To see it would be to invite it closer. The whispers swelled, no longer a chorus, but a single voice rising from many. It spoke through my bones rather than my ears. "Do not let it die." The command shook me, tearing through marrow and blood. I stumbled, nearly slipping into the black sea yawning far beneath. The lighthouse's beams swept across me, pale light cutting the mist. My body froze. For a heartbeat I saw myself in its glow, a shadow clinging to iron, a frail figure against endless water. And in that light another shadow loomed above me, long-limbed, head bowed, faceless void staring down. The whispers shrieked. The figure descended. It did not climb, did not move as humans do. It stretched, body elongating, limbs flowing like water, closing distance in impossible jerks. I screamed, hands clawing at the iron rail, forcing myself downward, faster, faster, boots slipping on wet metal. The sea cooled beneath, black and endless. Another toll erupted from the tower, deeper than any before, shattering through my skull. My vision burst white. Blood filled my ears. The iron groaned as the entire lighthouse trembled, beacon jerking in its steady turn. The whispers rose into a storm of voices, all demanding the same thing. "Keep the light! Keep the light!" I stumbled onto the base platform at last, iron door hanging crooked against the stone. I hurled myself inside, slamming it shut. The tower shuddered, dust raining from cracks in the ceiling. The air inside reeked of oil, thick and choking. Machinery clanked above, the beacon's gears grinding faster, louder, though no hand turned them. I forced myself toward the stairwell that wound downward into the keeper's chambers. My boots struck stone, echoes multiplying unnaturally, chasing me like a crowd. The whispers pressed close, curling through my skin, urging, commanding. In the keeper's quarters I stopped, chest heaving. The room was as I had left it, rotted bed, stained desk, shattered lamp. Yet the air was no longer still. It pulsed, each beat in rhythm with the beacon's turn above. Then the door slammed behind me. The figure stood there, filling the frame, cloak dripping, faceless void burning black. Whispers bled from it in torrents, so loud I fell to my knees, clutching my skull. The command drilled deeper, carving into thought, leaving no space for anything else. "Do not let it die!" I staggered up, stumbling backward until I struck the desk. My hand landed on the oil lamp's shards, glass biting into my palm. The sting was sharp, real, grounding. I gripped a jagged piece tight, blood slicking my fingers. The figure advanced, its limbs bent in impossible angles, body jerking with each step. The void where its face should have been opened wider, swallowing light, swallowing sound. The whispers grew deafening. Desperation surged. I hurled the shard. It vanished into the void, consumed without a trace. The figure lunged. I turned and smashed through the rotted window, wood splintering, glass slicing my arms. Cold air exploded against me as I tumbled out, body striking the rain-slicked rocks. Pain flared hot, white. I rolled, slid, then caught myself on jagged stone, the sea roaring silently below. Above, the beacon swept again, its glow spilling across me, cutting the mist. For a moment the whispers faltered. The void face shrieked without sound, retreating into the tower's dark. I crawled down the rocks, scraping skin raw, dragging myself toward the shore. Each movement was agony, but the distance widened, the tower shrinking behind me. At last, I reached the sand collapsing into the wet grit. The whispers faded, the tolls ceased. The sea roared again, waves crashing loud, beautiful. I lay trembling, rain on my face, breath ragged. I had escaped, or so I believed. The storm eased as I lay on the sand, waves breaking loud and steady, wind tearing at the mist. Every sound was blessedly natural, untainted by whispers. My chest ached, my hands bled, but I laughed, a broken, gasping laugh. I had escaped. The lighthouse loomed behind me, pale against the clouds. Its beacon still turned, sweeping in endless arcs across the sea. Each pass carved through the night like a blade. I told myself I would never climb it again, never set foot within those walls. Let it turn forever, untended, unwanted. I reached for my phone, cracked but alive. Its screen flickered, the battery nearly gone. Relief swelled. If I could call for help, if I could speak to another voice, the nightmare would end. But the screen did not show the usual display. Instead, it was black. At the center, a single white light rotated slowly, sweeping from left to right, then back again. A beacon, miniature and endless. I froze, staring, my breath caught. The phone vibrated once in my hand. Text appeared beneath the turning light, stark and merciless. "You are the keeper now." The beacon in the tower swept over the beach, flooding me in its pale glow. My body locked. For a heartbeat, I saw my own shadow stretch impossibly tall, limbs bending wrong, head bowed. The whispers returned, soft but certain, curling through the roar of the waves. "Keep the light.